The crisp autumn morning at Atlanta International Airport's private terminal started like any other day. Dr. Michelle Bennett adjusted her designer blazer and pulled her carry-on luggage behind her, its wheels clicking rhythmically against the polished floor. At 42, she had made this walk countless times before, heading to medical conferences across the country where she often served as a keynote speaker. Today's destination was Boston, where she would present her groundbreaking research on pediatric neurosurgery. The private jet waited on the tarmac, but between her and the aircraft stood Thomas Reeves, a security guard who had worked at the terminal for 3 years. As Dr. Bennett approached the security checkpoint, she noticed how Reeves straightened his back and narrowed his eyes. She had grown accustomed to these subtle changes in body language throughout her career, but today would prove different from the usual minor inconveniences she gracefully handled. ID and boarding documentation, Reeves demanded, his tone notably harsher than the friendly greeting he had given to the elderly white couple just moments before. Dr. Bennett reached into her leather bag and produced her identification, pilot-approved passenger list, and boarding documents, all meticulously organized as always. Reeves studied her documents with exaggerated scrutiny, flipping through them multiple times while occasionally glancing up at her with suspicion. Behind her, other passengers began to form a line, but Reeves seemed unbothered by the delay he was causing. "These don't look right to me," he declared loudly, causing several heads to turn. "Are you sure you're in the right terminal? The commercial flights are in the main building." His emphasis on the word commercial made his implication clear to everyone within earshot. Dr. Bennett maintained her professional composure, though her heart raced with a familiar mixture of anger and exhaustion. "Yes, I'm certain I'm in the correct terminal. As my documentation shows, I'm boarding the 9:30 a.m. private flight to Boston Medical Conference." The situation escalated when Reeves pulled out his phone and began making calls, supposedly to verify her credentials. Meanwhile, he continued to wave through other passengers, checking their documents with only cursory glances. The disparity in treatment was becoming increasingly obvious to onlookers. Sarah Chen, a young tech executive waiting in line, had started recording the interaction on her phone. She couldn't believe what she was witnessing, a clearly accomplished professional woman being treated like an intruder based solely on her race. Time ticked by mercilessly. Dr. Bennett watched as her scheduled departure time approached. She had been standing at the checkpoint for 25 minutes, while other passengers cleared security in less than 2 minutes each. "I need to speak with your supervisor," Dr. Bennett finally stated, her voice firm but controlled. Years of handling high-pressure situations in the operating room had taught her the value of remaining calm under stress. "Ma'am, I am the senior security officer on duty," Reeves responded, puffing up his chest. "And I need to be absolutely certain about who we let through to our private aircraft." Just then, Marcus Rodriguez, the terminal's assistant manager, rushed over. He had been alerted by another staff member about the developing situation. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, quickly assessing the scene. "Mr. Reeves seems to have concerns about my documentation," Dr. Bennett explained, maintaining her professional demeanor. "I've been waiting here for nearly 30 minutes, and my flight leaves in 10 minutes. Rodriguez quickly reviewed her documents, his face showing increasing concern as he realized what was happening. "Dr. Bennett, your documents are in perfect order. Please proceed to your flight. I apologize for any inconvenience." But the damage was done. The delay had cost precious time, and as Dr. Bennett finally cleared security, she received a notification on her phone. Her pilot had to start their takeoff procedures to maintain their flight schedule. She would miss her flight and her opening keynote speech at the conference. As she watched her scheduled aircraft taxi away, Dr. Bennett felt a complex mix of emotions. The familiar weight of discriminatory treatment sat heavy on her shoulders, but something felt different this time. The numerous witnesses, the video evidence, and the sheer blatancy of the discrimination suggested this incident might not be so easily swept under the rug. What Thomas Reeves didn't realize as he smugly returned to his post was that his actions that morning would soon spiral far beyond his control. In an age of social media and increasing awareness of racial bias, his behavior would not go unnoticed or unchallenged. The wheels of consequence were already in motion, though he remained blissfully unaware of the scrutiny about to rain down on his career. Sarah Chen's fingers trembled slightly as she downloaded the video she had just recorded. The young tech executive had captured the entire 17-minute interaction between Dr. Bennett and security guard Thomas Reeves on her smartphone. After witnessing such blatant discrimination, she knew she couldn't stay silent. Standing in the private terminal's coffee shop, Sarah reviewed the footage. The video clearly showed Reeves' dismissive tone, his exaggerated scrutiny of Dr. Bennett's documents, and the stark contrast in how he treated other passengers. The audio was crystal clear, including his condescending suggestion about commercial flights and his suspicious questioning of Dr. Bennett's right to be there. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah posted the video to her Twitter account. Her hands still shaking with anger, she wrote, "Watch this security guard block an accomplished black doctor from boarding her private flight while letting others pass freely. This happened 30 minutes ago at Atlanta International's private terminal. #racism, #discrimination." Within minutes, the video began to spread. Sarah's followers, many of whom worked in the tech industry, started sharing it with their networks. The clear footage and undeniable discrimination struck a chord with viewers, leading to thousands of retweets within the first hour. Meanwhile, Dr. Bennett sat in the terminal's waiting area, rescheduling her flight and calling the conference organizers. As she handled these arrangements, her phone started buzzing continuously with notifications. Colleagues, friends, and even strangers were sending her links to the viral video of her experience. The footage had caught the attention of several civil rights activists and prominent social media influencers. By early afternoon, major news websites had picked up the story. The #LetterBennettFly started trending, and internet sleuths quickly identified both the airport and Thomas Reeves. Comments poured in from around the world. "This is what we deal with every day, even when we're successful. Look at how he doesn't even check other passengers' IDs properly. She handled it with such grace, but she shouldn't have to." 3 hours after the incident, the video had reached over 2 million views. Local news stations in Atlanta began sending reporters to the airport. Their cameras captured Thomas Reeves still working his shift, unaware that his face was spreading across the internet and his actions were being dissected by millions. Rebecca Martinez, a popular social media activist with a large following, dug deeper into Dr. Bennett's background and shared her findings. The woman this guard profiled is Dr. Michelle Bennett, a pediatric neurosurgeon who has saved hundreds of children's lives. She was heading to Boston to present breakthrough research. "This is what racism costs us as a society." The private aviation company's social media team scrambled to respond as their accounts were flooded with angry comments and demands for action. Their first statement, a generic response about investigating the incident, only fueled more outrage. Sarah Chen, whose video had sparked the firestorm, received a direct message from Dr. Bennett thanking her for documenting the incident. "For years, these things have happened behind closed doors," Dr. Bennett wrote. "Having evidence makes a difference." By late afternoon, traditional media outlets had picked up the story. News vans lined the street outside the private terminal, hoping to catch either Dr. Bennett or Thomas Reeves for comment. Security camera footage from different angles began to surface, providing even more evidence of the discriminatory treatment. The video's impact reached beyond social media. Private aviation companies across the country began receiving questions about their own security protocols and anti-discrimination policies. Other professionals of color started sharing similar experiences using the #FlyingWildLack. Thomas Reeves finally realized something was wrong when his supervisor pulled him aside near the end of his shift. As he was escorted to the management office, he passed by a television in the terminal lobby showing his own face on the local news. His expression changed from confusion to concern as he began to understand the magnitude of his actions. The viral video had done more than expose one incident of discrimination. It had sparked a larger conversation about bias in private aviation and luxury services. As evening fell, Dr. Bennett's rescheduled flight took off for Boston, but the digital evidence of her morning experience continued to spread, ensuring that this time, such discrimination wouldn't be ignored or forgotten. The power of the recorded evidence meant that Thomas Reeves' actions would face unprecedented scrutiny. His career, built on years of unchecked authority, was about to encounter something he hadn't planned for: accountability in the age of social media. The Boston Medical Conference Hall buzzed with tension as Dr. James Sullivan, the event coordinator, stepped onto the stage. He cleared his throat and addressed the packed auditorium of medical professionals who had been waiting for Dr. Michelle Bennett's keynote speech. Due to an unfortunate incident of discrimination at Atlanta International Airport, Dr. Bennett was prevented from boarding her flight this morning, he announced, his voice tight with controlled anger. The room erupted in murmurs and gasps. Many attendees were already aware of the viral video, having watched it during their morning break. 300 miles away in Atlanta, Dr. Bennett sat in her office at Children's Hope Hospital, turning her missed conference into an unexpected opportunity. She had just finished an emergency surgery on a 6-year-old patient when her phone rang. It was Diana Rodriguez, a producer from Good Morning America. "Dr. Bennett, we'd like to have you on tomorrow's show to discuss what happened," Diana explained. "Your story has resonated with millions of people, and we believe it's important to address this issue on a national platform." Before Dr. Bennett could respond, her office door opened. Linda Carter, the hospital's PR director, rushed in with an iPad showing real-time social media statistics. The video of her experience had now reached 15 million views. Hashtags like #LetterBennettFly and #FlyingWhileBlack were still trending, and major civil rights organizations had issued statements condemning the incident. "The aviation company's CEO has been trying to reach you," Linda informed her, "and there are reporters outside the hospital. How would you like to handle this?" Dr. Bennett took a deep breath, remembering all the times she had faced discrimination in silence. But this time was different. The world was watching, waiting for her response. She decided to face it head-on. Meanwhile, at Atlanta International Airport's private terminal, chaos ensued. Protesters had gathered outside, holding signs that read, "Stop racial profiling" and "Fire racist guards." Local news crews conducted live broadcasts from the scene, their cameras capturing the growing crowd. Inside the terminal, Thomas Reeves sat in a small office, facing the aviation company's human resources director and legal team. His hands fidgeted with his security badge as they played the viral video for him. The room fell into uncomfortable silence as the footage ended. "Can you explain your actions, Mr. Reeves?" the HR director asked, her pen poised over a notepad. Reeves stammered through various excuses. He was just being thorough. He had concerns about security. He was following protocol. But when they showed him footage of his different treatment of other passengers, his explanations fell flat. Back at Children's Hope Hospital, Dr. Bennett finished typing her official statement. She had chosen her words carefully, focusing not on anger but on creating lasting change, the statement read. "What happened to me today happens to countless professionals of color across our country. While I'm grateful the incident was documented and shared, our focus should be on preventing such discrimination, not just exposing it. I plan to work with aviation companies to implement better training and protocols. Change comes through action, not just awareness." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The medical community rallied behind her, with thousands of doctors sharing their own experiences with discrimination. The Boston Medical Conference organizers announced they would dedicate a portion of next year's event to discussing bias in professional settings. Sarah Chen, whose video had sparked the movement, received hundreds of messages from people thanking her for speaking up. She had been invited to appear on several news shows but declined, insisting the focus should remain on Dr. Bennett and the larger issue at hand. By evening, Dr. Bennett finally left her office, escorted by hospital security past the crowd of reporters. As she drove home, radio stations were discussing her case. The incident had evolved from a viral video into a national conversation about racial bias in professional spaces. Her phone buzzed with a text from her teenage daughter. "Mom, you're trending on TikTok, and all my friends say you're handling this like a queen." Dr. Bennett smiled, thinking about how this difficult day might lead to positive change. She had already accepted Good Morning America's invitation and planned to use the platform to advocate for better training and accountability in all service industries. The immediate aftermath of the incident had shown her something powerful. When discrimination is exposed, many people will stand up against it. The challenge now was to turn this moment of awareness into lasting change. Elite Aviation Services corporate headquarters in downtown Atlanta was in crisis mode. CEO Richard Martinez had canceled all his meetings to deal with the growing scandal. The company's phones hadn't stopped ringing since the video went viral, and their social media team was overwhelmed with thousands of angry comments. "What else have we found?" Martinez asked his team of executives gathered in the emergency meeting. Sarah Williams, the head of human resources, opened a thick folder on the conference table. "We've uncovered 7 previous complaints against Thomas Reeves," she reported, her voice grave. "All of them involved passengers of color, but none were properly investigated." The room fell silent as she spread the documents across the table. The earliest complaint dated back to Reeves' first month on the job. A black business executive had reported being questioned extensively while his white colleagues walked through security without issue. Another complaint came from a famous Latino musician who was delayed until he missed his flight. All the incidents followed a similar pattern. Why weren't these complaints addressed? Martinez demanded, his face reddening with anger. The security department head shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Reeves always had explanations. He cited security protocols, said he was being thorough. We didn't dig deeper. As they reviewed more documents, the picture became clearer. Reeves had been transferred from the main airport terminal to the private aviation section after complaints there too. Instead of addressing the problem, they had simply moved it. Meanwhile, the company's legal team was reviewing security camera footage from the past 3 months. The numbers were damning. Passengers of color were 3 times more likely to face extended questioning from Reeves. He averaged 2 minutes checking white passengers' documents, but spent 15 to 20 minutes with passengers of color. "This isn't just about one incident anymore," Martinez said, rubbing his temples. "We have a systemic failure here." Just then, his assistant rushed in with breaking news. The National Aviation Security Board had announced an investigation into discriminatory practices at private terminals across the country. Elite aviation would be their first focus. In another part of the building, Thomas Reeves sat alone in a small office waiting. His security badge had been deactivated, and his locker was being searched. The company had discovered something else. He had been fired from 2 previous security jobs for similar incidents. Somehow, these red flags had been missed during his hiring. The investigation expanded beyond Reeves. Other employees began coming forward with stories about complaints they'd witnessed but hadn't reported. A janitor admitted to seeing Reeves regularly delay minority passengers but had been afraid to speak up for fear of losing his job. By late afternoon, Elite Aviation's legal team had prepared a preliminary report. The findings were worse than expected. 23 documented incidents of potential discrimination in 3 years. Multiple verbal warnings that were never officially recorded. A pattern of transferring problem employees instead of addressing issues. No mandatory bias training for security personnel. Inadequate complaint investigation procedures. Martinez called an emergency board meeting. The company's stock had dropped 12% since the morning, and major clients were threatening to take their business elsewhere. "We need immediate action," he told the board. "This isn't just about firing one guard anymore. We need to completely overhaul our systems." The board members watched silently as he outlined the crisis management plan. Immediate suspension of all security personnel pending review. Hiring an external firm to investigate all past complaints. Mandatory bias training for all employees. Creation of a new oversight committee. Installation of body cameras for all security staff. Development of clear protocols for complaint investigation. As the meeting concluded, Martinez received word that Dr. Bennett's appearance on Good Morning America would air the next day. The company had already reached out to her through their crisis management team, but she had declined to speak with them until they presented a concrete plan for change. The investigation had revealed more than just one racist guard. It had exposed a corporate culture that had allowed discrimination to flourish through inaction and negligence. As night fell over Atlanta, Elite Aviation faced its biggest challenge yet, proving to the world that they could transform their failure into meaningful reform. The company's reputation hung by a thread, and Thomas Reeves' actions had become the catalyst for what would need to be a complete organizational overhaul. The question remained, would these changes be enough to restore public trust? The Good Morning America studio lights shone brightly as Dr. Michelle Bennett sat across from host Robin Roberts. Millions of Americans tuned in, eager to hear directly from the woman in the viral video that had sparked a national conversation about racial profiling. "Dr. Bennett, you've performed over 1,000 successful brain surgeries, saved hundreds of children's lives, yet you were treated like an intruder at that airport," Robin began, her voice carrying a mix of sympathy and controlled anger. "How did that make you feel?" Dr. Bennett adjusted her glasses, her calm demeanor masking the emotional weight of the past few days. "What struck me most wasn't the discrimination itself, sadly. I've faced that before. It was watching other passengers walk through freely while I stood there, my credentials questioned repeatedly." The interview cut to clips from the viral video, now viewed over 50 million times across various platforms. National news networks have been running the footage in heavy rotation, each replay adding fuel to the growing controversy. Across town, Thomas Reeves watched the interview from his sister's living room, having avoided returning to his own home where reporters camped outside. His face had become synonymous with discrimination in America, his actions dissected by social commentators and news anchors nationwide. The media coverage had expanded beyond the initial incident. Investigative reporters had uncovered Reeves' history at other security jobs, including previously unreported incidents of racial profiling. Local news stations interviewed former colleagues who described a pattern of discriminatory behavior that had gone unchecked for years. Meanwhile, at the CNN headquarters in Atlanta, producers prepared a special report titled "Flying While Black: America's Aviation Bias." They had collected dozens of similar stories from across the country. Successful professionals of color sharing their experiences of discrimination at airports. The story had touched a nerve in Hollywood as well. Several black celebrities began sharing their own experiences with aviation discrimination. Famous director Marcus Thompson posted a video recounting 5 separate incidents where he'd been profiled at private terminals, despite owning his own jet. Social media continued to amplify the conversation. The original video, hosted by Sarah Chen, had spawned thousands of response videos. TikTok users reenacted the incident to show its absurdity. Twitter users shared statistics about discrimination in luxury services. Instagram was flooded with stories of similar experiences. Dr. Bennett's interview took an unexpected turn when she revealed her plans for advocacy. "I'm establishing the Equal Access Initiative," she announced. "We'll work to implement anti-bias training across the aviation industry and create clear reporting systems for discrimination." The response was immediate. Within hours of the announcement, 3 major airlines pledged support for the initiative. Tech companies offered to develop apps for reporting discriminatory incidents. Civil rights organizations promised to provide legal support. Back in the studio, Robin Roberts read live reactions from viewers. Messages of support flooded in from across the country. Dr. Bennett is turning pain into progress. Finally, someone is addressing the elephant in the room of luxury travel. This is how you create real change, with solutions, not just complaints. The media attention had real-world consequences. Elite aviation stock continued to fall. Other private aviation companies rushed to announce their own anti-discrimination measures, afraid of facing similar scrutiny. Security companies began reviewing their hiring practices and training programs. Later that afternoon, Dr. Bennett spoke at a hastily organized press conference outside her hospital. Reporters crowded around as she detailed her vision for industry-wide change. Camera flashes lit up the scene as she held up proposed guidelines for security screening procedures. "This isn't about one incident or one person," she explained to the assembled media. "It's about changing a system that has allowed discrimination to persist behind the scenes at our nation's airports and private terminals." The news cycle showed no signs of slowing down. Major publications were working on in-depth features about discrimination in luxury services. Cable news networks planned special segments about racial profiling in aviation. Social media platforms created special hashtag pages to organize the growing movement. As evening approached, Dr. Bennett finally headed home, exhausted but determined. Her phone buzzed with interview requests from international media outlets. The story had gone global, touching a chord with people worldwide who had faced similar discrimination. What had started as one woman's humiliating experience had evolved into a catalyst for change, forcing America to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege, prejudice, and power in spaces traditionally reserved for the elite. The aviation industry was in turmoil. 2 weeks after Dr. Bennett's incident, major changes were sweeping through private terminals across America. Elite Aviation's problems had sparked an industry-wide examination that revealed uncomfortable truths about discrimination in private air travel. The National Aviation Security Board's preliminary report painted a disturbing picture. After reviewing security footage from 50 private terminals nationwide, they found that passengers of color faced additional screening 67% more often than white passengers. The average security check for minority passengers lasted 12 minutes longer. Jennifer Martinez, the lead investigator, stood before a panel of industry executives in Washington, D.C. The room was packed with representatives from every major private aviation company in the country. Her presentation slides showed stark statistics that couldn't be ignored. "This isn't about one guard or one company," Martinez explained, pointing to the data. "We're seeing systematic problems across the entire industry." She clicked to the next slide, showing complaint records that had been buried or dismissed over the past 5 years. In the audience, CEO Richard Martinez from Elite Aviation shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His company's handling of Thomas Reeves had become a case study in what not to do. Aviation magazines were already calling it the Bennett effect, the ripple of changes spreading through the industry after the viral video. Private aviation companies were scrambling to implement new policies: mandatory body cameras for all security personnel, anonymous reporting systems for discrimination, regular audits of security screening times, third-party reviews of all discrimination complaints, monthly bias training sessions. The cost of these changes was significant. Industry analysts estimated companies would spend over $500 million collectively on new training, equipment, and oversight systems. But the cost of not changing was even higher. Elite Aviation's stock had dropped 30% since the incident. At Atlanta International Airport's private terminal, new security procedures were already in place. Guards now worked in pairs, screening times were monitored by computer, and every interaction was recorded. The terminal had become a test site for the industry's reformed approach to security. Sarah Chen, whose video had started it all, was invited to tour the renovated terminal. She walked through with Dr. Bennett's Equal Access Initiative team, documenting the changes. The old security desk where Thomas Reeves had stood was gone, replaced by a modern screening area with clear protocols posted in multiple languages. "The physical changes are important," Dr. Bennett said during a CNN interview about the industry reforms. "But what matters most is changing the culture that allowed discrimination to thrive." Her words resonated across other luxury service industries. High-end hotels, exclusive clubs, and luxury car services began reviewing their own practices. Nobody wanted to become the next viral example of discrimination. The Federal Aviation Administration announced new guidelines for private aviation security. Companies would now face regular audits of their screening practices, with heavy fines for discriminatory patterns. Security guards would need additional certification focusing on bias prevention. Thomas Reeves' case had become a warning to the industry. His security license was under review, and his story was being used in training sessions about what not to do. Former colleagues came forward with more stories, revealing how his behavior had been ignored or excused for years. Private aviation companies started competing to show who could be most progressive. One company hired civil rights lawyers to oversee their security operations. Another created a passenger advocacy board led by minority professionals. A third offered free flights to minority business groups affected by past discrimination. Dr. Bennett's Equal Access Initiative gained momentum. Major corporations pledged millions in support, seeing it as a chance to be on the right side of change. The initiative began developing industry-wide standards for fair treatment in luxury services. At a private aviation conference in Las Vegas, company executives gathered to discuss the future of their industry. The mood was serious as they reviewed the costs of implementing new systems. But as one CEO pointed out, the cost of not changing is far greater than the cost of reform. Security companies that provided guards to private terminals faced their own reckoning. Background checks became more thorough, training more extensive, and monitoring more constant. The days of moving problem employees to different locations were over. The industry's transformation wasn't just about new rules and systems. It was about acknowledging a problem that had been ignored for too long. As Dr. Bennett had predicted, her humiliating experience was becoming a catalyst for lasting change in how America's private aviation industry treated all its passengers. Thomas Reeves sat nervously in his lawyer's office, staring at the stack of papers on the desk. 3 months after the viral video incident, his professional life had completely unraveled. His security license was officially under review by the state board, and his future in the industry looked increasingly bleak. "It doesn't look good, Thomas," his lawyer, Michael Peterson, said bluntly. "The state board has received testimony from 23 former colleagues about your past incidents. Elite Aviation has submitted documentation of all previous complaints. And now, 3 other security companies have come forward about incidents during your employment with them." Reeves wiped sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. The past months had been a nightmare. He'd received hundreds of angry messages on social media. His face had become a symbol of discrimination in countless news stories. Even his own family members had distanced themselves after learning about his history of biased behavior. The state licensing board's preliminary report lay open on the desk. It detailed a pattern of discriminatory behavior spanning 8 years across 4 different security jobs. Each incident had been documented but buried, each complaint filed but ignored. Until now. "They're making an example of me," Reeves protested weakly, but his voice lacked conviction. Deep down, he knew this was more than just about one viral incident. This was about years of unchecked behavior finally catching up with him. Across town, the Georgia State Security Licensing Board was holding a special session. The room was packed with industry representatives, civil rights activists, and media as they discussed new guidelines for security guard licensing. The Reeves case had exposed major gaps in how security guards were screened, trained, and monitored. "We can no longer simply transfer problem employees to different locations," Board Chairman James Wilson announced. "From now on, any substantiated complaint of discrimination will trigger an immediate license review." The new regulations were strict. Mandatory background checks including social media history. Psychological evaluation for all license applicants. Annual bias training with testing requirements. Zero tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. Regular performance reviews including screening time analysis. Immediate suspension for credible discrimination complaints. For Thomas Reeves, these changes came too late. His license suspension hearing was scheduled for the following week. The evidence against him was overwhelming: security footage, witness statements, documented complaints, and of course, the viral video that had started it all. His former employer, Elite Aviation, had already settled with Dr. Bennett for an undisclosed amount. Part of the settlement included funding for anti-discrimination training programs across the industry. Reeves would be featured as a case study in these training sessions, an example of how implicit bias could destroy careers and damage companies. The professional consequences continued to mount. Security companies across the country had added his name to their do not hire lists. His resume, once impressive with years of high-level security experience, was now toxic. No company wanted to risk hiring someone with his history. At the license suspension hearing, Reeves faced the board alone. His lawyer had advised him to show remorse, to acknowledge his mistakes, but he struggled to find the right words. As video evidence played on the screen, not just the viral incident, but security footage from years of discriminatory behavior, he finally began to understand the magnitude of his actions. "Mr. Reeves," the board chairman began, "your pattern of behavior shows a consistent bias against minorities in your security screening practices. This board cannot allow someone with your history to continue working in positions of authority over others." The vote was unanimous. Thomas Reeves' security license was permanently revoked. He would never work in security again. Additionally, the board recommended that his case be shared with other licensing bodies to prevent him from simply switching to another type of enforcement or authority position. As he left the hearing room, reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but Reeves kept his head down. His career was over, but his case had sparked important changes in the industry. Future security guards would face stricter screening, better training, and real accountability for discriminatory actions. The message was clear. In an age of smartphones and social media, discrimination couldn't hide behind badges or uniforms anymore. Thomas Reeves had learned this lesson too late, but his downfall would serve as a warning to others in positions of authority. Bias and discrimination could no longer go unchecked. 1 year after the viral video incident, Dr. Michelle Bennett stood at a podium in the Grand Ballroom of the Atlanta Civic Center. Behind her, a banner read "Equal Access Initiative, 1 year of progress." The room was filled with aviation industry leaders, civil rights activists, and media representatives. What happened to me that morning wasn't unique, Dr. Bennett began, her voice carrying authority across the silent room. What was unique was that it was captured on video, and the world refused to look away. Today, we're here to ensure such incidents become truly unique, by making them nearly impossible to happen again. The changes over the past year had been remarkable. The Equal Access Initiative, founded in the wake of the incident, had grown into a powerful force for change. More than 200 private aviation companies had adopted their comprehensive anti-discrimination protocols. Their training programs had reached over 50,000 security personnel nationwide. Statistics displayed on the screen behind Dr. Bennett told the story. 78% reduction in discrimination complaints at private terminals. Average security screening times now virtually identical across all racial groups. 96% of security personnel successfully completing enhanced bias training. Zero incidents of verified racial profiling at participating companies in the past 6 months. Sarah Chen, whose video had sparked the movement, sat in the front row. She had become the initiative's head of digital advocacy, using social media to document and promote positive changes in the industry. Her original video was now used in training sessions across the country, showing how one person's decision to speak up could create lasting change. Elite Aviation had transformed itself from a cautionary tale into a model for corporate reform. The new CEO, Diana Rodriguez, took the stage after Dr. Bennett. "We learned the hard way that silence enables discrimination," she explained. "Today, we're proud to be leading the industry in transparent, equitable security practices." The company's new security protocols have become the gold standard. Security teams reflecting the diversity of their passengers. Real-time monitoring of screening statistics. Regular external audits of security practices. Clear, accessible complaint procedures. Immediate investigation of any reported bias. Thomas Reeves' story had become a footnote in a larger narrative of change. After losing his security license, he had moved to another state, taking a job as a warehouse worker. His last public statement, given to a local newspaper, expressed regret not for his actions, but for being caught on camera. But the impact of that morning lived on in positive ways. The Georgia State Security Licensing Board had created the Bennett Rule, requiring all security personnel to undergo extensive bias training before licensing. Other states were following suit, recognizing the need for systematic change. Dr. Bennett's medical career had continued to flourish. Her pediatric neurosurgery department had expanded, and she had trained dozens of young doctors, particularly focusing on mentoring minorities in the medical field. Her experience had taught her the importance of opening doors for others. The aviation industry's transformation had inspired similar changes in other luxury service sectors. High-end hotels, exclusive restaurants, and premium car services had all adopted versions of the initiative's protocols. The ripple effects continued to spread, challenging old assumptions about who belonged in prestigious spaces. As Dr. Bennett concluded her speech, she shared a recent experience. "Last week, I flew through the same terminal where this all began. The security team was professional, efficient, and treated everyone with equal respect. That's what progress looks like, not just new rules, but new attitudes." The audience rose in a standing ovation, but Dr. Bennett raised her hand for silence. "Our work isn't finished," she cautioned. "As long as anyone faces discrimination based on their appearance, we have more to do. But today, we can say with confidence that when you stand up against bias, change is possible." The Equal Access Initiative announced its plans for the coming year, expanding into international aviation, developing technology to track and prevent discriminatory practices, and creating educational programs for schools and universities. As the event concluded, Dr. Bennett looked out at the diverse faces in the crowd: industry leaders, activists, security personnel, and ordinary citizens who had joined the movement for change. What had begun as a humiliating morning had transformed into a powerful force for progress. The message was clear. In modern America, discrimination couldn't hide in plain sight anymore. When exposed, it would face not just criticism, but consequences. And most importantly, it would spark changes that reached far beyond one incident, one person, or one industry.